Dad always said, "Chloe, you're as tough as the old boots I fish in." And he wasn't wrong. Raised in a small town where the winter didn't ask if you were ready before it hit, I grew up pretty fast after Mom passed. All I got of her is a couple of pictures where she's smiling under the brim of Dad's fishing hat, her eyes kind of crinkling at the corners. Dad was a fisherman, started with a beat-up boat that looked like it'd sink if you sneezed too hard. But he had big plans, worked his fingers to the bone, and eventually built up a business that had our name slapped on a huge fish processing plant down by the docks. He was out before sunrise, back after dark, always smelling like the catch of the day. It wasn't like he left me to fend for myself though. Carol, my stepmom, came into our lives when I was about 7. She couldn't have kids of her own, so she poured all that pent-up love into me. We didn't always see eye to eye, especially when I hit those teenage years and got all prickly, but she stuck by me like glue. One night, I remember sitting at the kitchen table with my books spread out, and Dad came in, looking more tired than usual. Carol had fixed him his favorite, salmon, pan-fried just right, and he slumped down at the table, gratefully. "Thanks, love," he said to Carol, then turned to me with a look. "School going okay, kiddo?" "Sakai. Just boring," I shrugged, scribbling something in my notebook. "Boring," she says. "You hear that, Carol? Our girl's gonna be a genius, and she's bored." Dad chuckled, his eyes crinkling like Mom's in those old photos. Carol just smiled, ruffling my hair a bit too roughly. She'd better be, with college costs these days. That was our life. Simple, sometimes a bit rough, but filled with enough laughter to keep the cold out. When high school was done, I was itching to see more than icy roads and fish. I told Dad I wanted to go to California for college. He wasn't too thrilled at first, all that distance, but he knew I had it in me to make something of myself. "California, huh? You'll melt out there." He'd joke, but one evening, he got serious. We were fixing one of the nets, hands all tangled up in ropes and seaweed. "Dad, I gotta go. It's not enough here for me," I admitted, not wanting to hurt him but needing him to understand. He was quiet for a long moment, just working the ropes. Then, he nodded. "All right, Chloe. You go make us proud. But promise you'll call your old man, huh?" So I went. Off to California with my dreams in one hand and a promise in the other. Maybe I was naive, maybe just young, but either way, I was ready, or so I thought. Stepping off the plane in California, the sun hit me like a slap in the face, warm and bright and relentless. Not a lick of the cold, harsh winds of Alaska. My first thought? Dad was right, I was gonna melt. College was a whole new world. Campus was buzzing with folks from all corners, talking fast about things I hadn't even heard of. I bunked with a girl named Jess, a local who took one look at my flannel and boots combo and said, "You're not in Alaska anymore, girl." "I can see that." I shot back, trying not to feel like a fish out of water. Jess laughed, a good, hearty sound. "You'll fit in just fine. Everyone does eventually." Classes kicked my butt at first. Economics isn't for the faint-hearted, and I had to hustle harder than I thought. Nights were long, coffee-fueled marathons with books and laptops. One day, slumped over a textbook in the library, a guy dropped into the seat opposite me. He had a smile that seemed too easy. "That looks intense. Preparing to take over the world?" "Just trying not to fail my midterms," I said, pushing up the glasses that had slid down my nose. "Ah, the humble student life. I'm Michael, by the way." He extended a hand, and I shook it, noting the firm grip. "Chloe. Nice to meet you," I replied, then went back to my books. Michael was in some of my classes, and we kept bumping into each other. We started having lunch together, sharing complaints about bosses and deadlines. Michael was easy to talk to, made me laugh more than I expected. It wasn't long before we started dating. He was different from the boys back home, smoother, more polished, but with a charm that felt genuine. A few months in, Michael's mom invited us over for dinner. I was nervous, smoothing down my dress, while Michael just grinned and told me, she's going to love you." His house was nicer than I expected, and his mom, Linda, was all smiles and hugs. She was a bit intense, asking a million questions about Alaska, my dad's business, and my plans for the future. "So, Chloe, Michael tells me you're quite the catch, what with your economics degree and all. You thinking about the long haul with my son here?" she asked, her eyes sharp but not unkind. I choked on my water a bit, coughing while Michael clapped me on the back. "Mom, give her a break," he laughed, but Linda just waved him off. "I'm just saying, it's good to think about these things," she said, serving up more food than I could possibly eat. The night ended with Linda whispering to me as we said goodbye, "You're good for him, Chloe. I can tell." Driving back, Michael was quiet for a long time before he said, "So, what do you think? About us, I mean?" "I like where this is going," I said, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. "Let's see where it leads, okay?" "Okay," he agreed, and for the first time in a long time, California didn't feel quite so far from home. As I lay in bed that night, the distant sound of the ocean in my ears, I thought about Dad and Carol. They'd be happy for me, I figured. Happy that I was finding my way, making connections, maybe even building a future. The wedding was a blur, flowers, smiling faces, and a dress that felt a bit too tight. After all the dancing and cheers, when we finally settled into living at his mom Linda's house, reality started to set in. "Chloe, you'll see, it's easier this way. Mom needs us, and we can save up for our own place," Michael reassured me one evening as we unpacked our wedding gifts in what used to be his old room. "Yeah, I guess you're right," I replied, trying to sound more convinced than I felt. The room still had his high school trophies and old posters on the walls. It didn't feel like ours, it felt like I was just visiting. Things were fine for a while. Linda handled most of the house chores, letting me find my footing at my new job and in this new role as a wife. But about 6 months in, everything changed overnight. "I went to the doctor today, Michael. My back's worse, and he says I need to take it easy," Linda announced one night at dinner, her voice tinged with worry. "Of course, Mom. Chloe and I can take on more around the house, can't we?" Michael said, turning to me. I could only nod, my mind racing with what that meant. Before I knew it, Linda's version of taking it easy meant I was doing everything from cleaning to cooking, with her supervising from a kitchen chair. "You'll want to add more salt to that, dear. Michael likes his food with a bit more flavor," she'd say, watching me fumble around with the spice jars. One day, as I was elbow-deep in scrubbing the bathroom, Michael called me. "Hey, Chloe, Mom's really not doing well." I was thinking, maybe you should consider taking some time off work to handle things around here. I stopped scrubbing, the sponge dripping in my hand. "Take time off? Michael, I just started getting the hang of things there," I protested, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. "It's just temporary, babe. For Mom. We need to look out for her," he pushed, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. So, I did it. I quit my job, telling myself it was the right thing to do, the family thing. But days turned into weeks, and my job at the office turned into full-time housekeeping. Linda's health issues seemed to vanish when it came to critiquing my cleaning. I'd vent to Michael when he got home, but it was like talking to a brick wall. "She's just trying to help, Chloe. You know how she is," he'd say, brushing it off, making me feel smaller and more isolated each time. Every day was a marathon of chores. I scrubbed, dusted, and cooked with all the energy I could muster, but Linda always found fault. "You missed a spot there, just behind the couch. And use more elbow grease, will you? It's still not clean," she would say, her voice sharp, cutting through the hum of the vacuum cleaner. Cooking was another battlefield. No matter how carefully I followed recipes or tweaked them to what I thought were her tastes, Linda's verdict was the same. After barely tasting a dish, she'd push her plate away slightly and sigh. "Bland and tasteless, Chloe. You really should take some cooking lessons." Michael, ever his mother's son, only shrugged off my complaints. Mom said in her ways, Chloe. She just wants to help you get better at this stuff. He'd say, his words meant to soothe, but only adding salt to my wounds. His indifference stung almost as much as his mother's critiques. One fateful day, the old washing machine decided it had enough. I was halfway through a load of laundry when it shuddered, clanked ominously, and then stopped. Smoke wafted from the motor like a distress signal. The sinking feeling in my stomach matched the silence of the now-dead machine. Linda came rushing in, drawn by the noise. Her reaction was volcanic. Look what you've done now. That was a perfectly good washing machine, and you've broken it because you can't even operate a simple machine correctly. Her words were like daggers, and her voice rose with every syllable. I stood there, the smell of burnt motor mingling with my rising panic. Linda, it was very old. It was bound to break down eventually. I tried to explain, my voice meek against her tirade. That's nonsense. It worked fine before you started using it. This is coming out of your pocket, Chloe. You're costing us so much. She stormed out of the room, leaving me to stare at the defunct appliance, feeling smaller and more helpless than ever. Later, in the quiet of our bedroom, I broached the topic with Michael, hoping for some support or at least a recognition of the unfairness. The washing machine broke today. Your mom thinks I should pay for a new one, I said, my voice nearly a whisper. He didn't look up from his phone. Well, can you? It would really help out. I don't have that kind of money, Michael. You know I left my job. I reminded him, a desperate edge creeping into my tone. Then ask your dad. He can afford it, he replied casually, as if I were discussing buying a new dress rather than solving a crisis inflicted by his mother. The call to my dad was one of the hardest things I've had to do. I dialed the number, each tone heavy with dread. When he picked up, his voice was a bomb, but it only made things harder. Hey, kiddo. How's everything with you? Dad's cheerful greeting twisted my heart. Hi, Dad. I'm good, but, I need a favor. Can you help me buy a new washing machine? Ours just broke, I said, skipping over the hows and whys. I couldn't bring myself to tell him the whole truth, it felt too much like betrayal. Of course, Chloe. I'll transfer the money right away. Don't you worry about a thing, he replied, his willingness to help both a relief and a burden. When the money came through, Linda oversaw the purchase of a new, top-of-the-line washing machine, boasting of its features to anyone who would listen. Before long things went from bad to unbearable. It started with her asking for money to cover minor repairs around the house, a leaky faucet here, a cracked tile there. But soon, those small demands escalated into full-blown renovations. Chloe, this house deserves to look its best. We need to live in a place that reflects our status, Linda would assert, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to upgrade her living room or the kitchen on a whim. I tried to resist, to suggest we budget or delay some of the work, but she brushed off my concerns with a wave of her hand. The first few times I called Dad to ask for money, I felt a knot in my stomach. He always answered with a smile, happy to see me, even if it was just on a screen. How's my girl? He'd ask, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I'm good, Dad. Listen, I need to ask for some help. We've got some repairs to do around the house, and well, it's a bit more than we can handle right now, I'd say, trying to keep my voice steady. Dad never hesitated, always quick to offer whatever help he could. Of course, kiddo. I'll transfer the money today. You just make sure you're taking care of yourself, alright? But Linda's demands grew. One video call turned into weekly sessions where she'd hover in the background, making sure I looked presentable. Put on some makeup, Chloe. Look lively for your father, she'd command, covering up the fatigue that had become my constant companion. It wasn't just the house that was being transformed. Linda decided she needed a new car, something more fitting for her status. And then, clothes from branded stores, because appearances matter, Chloe. Each request for money chipped away at my independence and my relationship with my father. I felt like a puppet, reciting lines Linda had given me. She made sure I never had a moment alone during those calls. If I even hinted at needing to talk to Dad in private, she'd find a way to interrupt or end the conversation quickly. Michael wasn't any help. He'd come home late, often smelling of booze, shrugging off my attempts to talk about how out of control things were getting. "It's what families do, Chloe. They help each other out," he'd slur, dismissing my concerns. Then I found out I was pregnant. It should have been a moment of joy, but my heart sank knowing how Linda would react. True to form, when I told her, her first response was not congratulations, but calculation. "This is wonderful news. Think of all the things the baby will need. You'll have to talk to your father, we'll need to set up a nursery, and babies need so much stuff," Linda enthused, already listing things to buy. Her excitement wasn't about the baby, it was about the new avenue for requests for money. "Make sure to look happy when you tell him. We want to make sure he's willing to help out with everything the baby needs," she instructed me before another choreographed call to my father. Sitting there, waiting for the screen to connect, I felt the lowest I had ever felt. I was about to bring a child into this mess, into this cycle of dependency and deceit that I couldn't seem to break free from. "Hey, Dad," I began, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. "I have some news, I'm going to have a baby." Dad's face lit up, a genuine moment of happiness in the charade my life had become. "That's wonderful, Chloe. Absolutely wonderful. You know I'll support you in any way I can." Living with Linda and Michael had become unbearable, but it grew worse after the birth of my baby. The days and nights merged into an endless cycle of demands, criticisms, and exhaustion. Michael was hardly ever home, and when he did show up, his presence only added to the tension. "You've really let yourself go, haven't you?" Michael would sneer, eyeing me as if I were a stranger, not the mother of his child. "You look like an elephant. I can't even stand to sleep next to you." His words cut deeper than knives, leaving scars no one could see. I cried most nights, silently, the sobs shaking my body while I tried to muffle the sound with a pillow so as not to wake the baby or attract Linda's attention. The baby didn't sleep well, up at all hours, crying more often than not. I was running on fumes, every day a test of my endurance. One particularly tough day, I was so exhausted that I fell asleep while a casserole was in the oven. The smell of burning woke me, but not before Linda stormed into the kitchen. "What on earth are you doing? You're wasting food, Chloe. Do you know how hard I work to provide for this family?" Linda screamed as she yanked the blackened casserole from the oven. I just fell asleep for a moment. I didn't mean to," I stammered, trying to apologize. "No excuses. You're not eating today. Maybe that will teach you to pay attention," Linda decreed, her voice cold and unforgiving. I was stunned, the hunger already gnawing at me. But worse was knowing I needed nutrition to breastfeed my baby, who depended entirely on me. Yet, I felt powerless to argue with her, the fear of further reprisal keeping me silent. That same night, Michael came home drunk. He stumbled through the door, his eyes barely focusing on me as I tried to soothe our crying baby. "Can't you keep that child quiet?" he barked, his voice laced with venom. "I'm trying, Michael. He's just fussy tonight," I said, my voice weary, holding our baby a little closer. Unsatisfied and belligerent, Michael pushed me, his hand shoving against my shoulder hard enough that I stumbled and hit the doorframe. Pain shot through me, but my first instinct was to protect the baby in my arms. That moment crystallized everything for me. The fear, the pain, the desperation, I couldn't live like this anymore. Not for me, not for my baby. This wasn't a home, it was a prison. Michael's stumble seemed minor to him, but to me, it was the last straw. Waiting for the right moment to leave was the hardest part. I watched the clock tick, each minute stretching endlessly until the notification came, another transfer of money from my dad. It was then I knew I had to make my move. Michael and Linda were both out for the day, and the house felt strangely silent, almost like it was holding its breath along with me. I dressed quickly, pulling on my old warm jacket and wrapping my baby tightly in his blanket. Every movement was calculated, silent, the fear of them coming back early gnawing at my insides. I grabbed a small bag that I had packed days ago, the essentials only, some clothes for me, and the baby in diapers. With my baby secured in my arms, I stepped outside, locking the door behind me one last time. The taxi ride to the airport was a blur, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. I kept looking over my shoulder, paranoid that Michael or Linda might pull up behind us. At the airport, I bought the tickets, my hands shaking as I handed over the cash. The amount drained nearly all the money I had, but it didn't matter. We were going to be safe, we were going to be free. I turned off my phone, cutting off any chance they had to track me down or persuade me to come back. Landing in Alaska was like stepping into another world. The biting cold slapped me awake from the haze of anxiety and fear that had clouded my mind. I hailed another taxi and gave the driver my dad's address. As we drove, the familiar landscapes of my childhood rolled past, each mile bringing a surge of memories and a flicker of hope. I arrived at my dad's house late at night. The porch light was a beacon in the darkness. With my baby now asleep against my chest, I walked up the steps and rang the doorbell. The wait felt like an eternity. Then, the door swung open, and there was my dad, his face etching from confusion to shock as he took in my appearance, exhausted, disheveled, my eyes swollen from crying. "Chloe, what's happened? Are you okay?" His voice was laden with concern. Tears streamed down my face as I stepped inside. "Dad, I had to leave. I couldn't stay there any longer. Please, I need your help." He didn't ask any more questions. He just wrapped his arms around me and my baby, pulling us into the warmth of the house. Carol came down the stairs, her expression turning from sleepy curiosity to alarm as she saw me. "Oh, Chloe," she gasped, rushing to embrace us. "What's going on?" I broke down, the story pouring out of me in between sobs, the control, the isolation, the despair, Michael's indifference, Linda's manipulation. They listened, their faces growing grim with every detail. Without a word, Dad stepped away and came back with his phone in hand. He dialed with a steadiness that belied his age. "I'm calling the police, and then I'm getting the best lawyer we can afford. We're going to fix this, Chloe. You're safe now. You're home." The courthouse was a blur of activity, but inside, the world seemed to slow down as I took the stand. Giving my testimony against Michael and his mother, Linda, was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. My voice shook as I recounted the details of the abuse and manipulation, but I felt a strength I didn't know I had, fueled by the desire to protect my child and reclaim my life. The judge's gavel sounded like a shot of finality when he fined Michael for his abusive behavior. It wasn't just a victory for me, it felt like justice for every silent moment I had endured under his and Linda's control. The divorce papers came through not long after. Signing them brought a mix of relief and sorrow. This wasn't how I had envisioned my marriage ending. But as I scribbled my name, I knew it was the first step toward a new beginning. Mr. Jenkins, our lawyer, was relentless. He dug through financial records and bank statements, piecing together the puzzle of how my father's money had been siphoned off to fund Linda's lavish tastes and renovations. The evidence was undeniable, and the court ordered that every penny be returned. The total came to over $230,000. Neither Michael nor Linda had the means to pay it back outright. The news of their deceit spread quickly among their friends and the local community, tarnishing their reputations severely. Michael struggled to find any substantial work after that, his previous employers distancing themselves from the scandal. In the end, they were forced to sell the house, Linda's pride and joy, the symbol of their greed. They moved into a small, cramped apartment in a less desirable part of town. Linda had to pick up a job at a local grocery store, a far cry from the leisurely life she had manipulated to maintain. Custody of my son was granted to me without contest. Michael was ordered to pay alimony, which he does, albeit begrudgingly. It's not about the money, though. It's about providing a stable and loving environment for my son, something I am now able to do back in the safety and comfort of my father's home. As I watch my son play in the yard, his laughter mingling with the wind, I feel a surge of hope for the future. The legal battles, the escape, the recovery, it's all behind us now. We've emerged stronger, bound by a resilience forged in the fires of adversity.